Hi everyone, my name's Rachel Moses and you are listening to the AHP Leader podcast. And this podcast is a one-off special and we're going to be talking all things research and how allied health professionals have not only got into research but how you can get into research and some of the challenges and opportunities along the way. So I'm delighted to be joined by this amazing panel, and again I've just noticed it's an all-female panel, and this is absolutely not deliberate, but I seem to have a habit of doing this, so I do apologise about the gender discrepancy that we have here, but hey ho to women in leadership roles and research, so I'm embracing it. So Anita, can I start with you please, to just introduce yourself and a little bit about you? Oh, Anita, you're just on mute there.
Yeah, can you? So my name's Anita Atwal, a disastrous start, and I am an associate professor in interprofessional working at London South Bank University, and I'm an occupational therapist by background. I've had a long career in research. I've run research centres, I support NIHR students, I supervise a lot of PhD students. I'm very passionate about research in allied health, and I think it's a really timely podcast to motivate AHPs to get into research.
Yeah, and just to blow Anita's trumpet on her behalf, she is incredibly well published, and if there's, what she doesn't know about research, we don't need to know. So thanks so much for joining us, Anita. Janet, coming down to you.
Hello, my name is Janice Janateen. I've just recently qualified with a PhD in clinical biomechanics from Imperial College London, and I've just taken up an NIHR clinical lecturer role at the University of Manchester, where part of my work involves research into low back pain, and part of my work involves building research capacity and capability within the NHS. I have years of clinical experience in musculoskeletal physiotherapy, so that's my background. And my greatest joy is really sharing what I know about research with others and inviting them in to take their place at the table.
Thank you. Wow, that sounds awesome. I have to say. Jennifer, coming down to you.
My name's Jen Williams. I am a diabetes specialist podiatrist at Torbay in South Devon NHS. I'm also affiliated with Plymouth University on a NIHR Pre-Doctoral Academic Fellowship, which is, I combine my NHS and my part-time academic work together at the moment at the start of my research career.
Thank you. Angie, you'll come to you next.
Hi, I'm Angie Logan, and I'm a neurophysio academic at the University of Plymouth, and I also still do some clinical work in my local area. My speciality is stroke and neurology, and I completed a PhD last year, which was an NIHR funded fellowship. And like Janet, I've got many years of clinical experience and in my area of stroke and neurology, and I am massively passionate about research. One of my on the side roles is AHP champion, research champion for NIHR and CAPRA, so any opportunity to take people's hand into delving into research and supporting people, I'm absolutely there with my bells, whistles and banners.
Thank you, Angie. And Rafiah, coming to you.
Hi, so I'm Rafiah Badat. I am a speech and language therapist, and I'm currently on the same PhD stream that Angie has just finished, so the NIHR Clinical Doctoral Research Fellowship, and that allows you to split clinical and research responsibilities. And so for the clinical aspect, I'm based at St George's Trust in South West London, and the research side is City University of London. And my focus is looking at working with children with language disorder to explore the potential for digital therapy. And I most definitely haven't had a linear path into research. Lots of stops and starts and tangents. So hopefully I can share that story and just show that, you know, if you're motivated in research, there's definitely different ways you can get into it, and you can dip in and out, and there's no right or wrong way, and it's about enjoying the process and being motivated by it, I think. Yeah.
Fabulous, thank you, Rafiah. And that's just led us in nicely. So again, Rafiah is juggling young children at the moment, as well as all of our other entrepreneurship activities. So Rafiah might have to dip in and out, just if you're wondering where she's going. So the panel today are here because they all share real passion and interest about research, and also about being enablers, about how more AHPs can get into research. Now, I am a self-professed non-academic here and have never had an interest in doing the research, but I certainly have an interest in learning from the research and implementing the research. So I suppose that's my initial disclaimer as a complete research novice here. But really, this whole concept of the podcast started from a tweet I put out, which was showcasing, I hope in a really considerate way, my disappointment in what I perceive to be recognition of authorship for a group of AHPs who I know significantly contributed to a research paper, but were nowhere near on the authorship panel. And yet there were medical colleagues that I knew. I don't work with them, but I knew, and just really questioned maybe their level of involvement and why some people get authorship over others. And as AHPs, are we the ones that are often kind of left out because we don't push it enough, or because we don't expect it, or because it's not inherent in our clinical activity, and because we don't have the same clinical academic pathways as, say, medics, or even nurses to some degree now? Are we being left behind in that opportunity for research? But actually, I feel really fortunate because I know so many like role models within AHP world, and how they have, you know, got themselves into research, or been offered opportunities along the way, or had role models like the ladies on this panel to help, you know, really inspire them and show them where the opportunities exist. So I'm going to start off by saying that's a kind of background of the podcast. Then that led to a further conversation around how we can actually showcase this information in a really accessible way, and how we can use the networks, for example, CAPRA, and how people can get involved in how we can disseminate information. So there's always a personal side to this, and I want to start by asking the panel just to tell us a little bit of background about their research journey, and you know, how they even got started. So Anita, can I come to you first, please?
Okay, so I got into research. You have to remember that I qualified over 30 years ago. So it was a time when AHPs definitely didn't do research and had diplomas and wasn't even a degree. So I was always in trouble as an OT student for asking questions, why, and I literally got told to shut up. So I knew there was an obvious solution to this. So I did my master's part-time. I worked, and in those days there was no time off, there was no NIHR, so I went in the evenings and I did my master's part-time. I was fortunate enough to do that. And then I had a personal disaster. My mother died after a routine hip operation, and in those days there's no such thing as quality assurance. It wasn't given any heparin, which is routinely given now. And it sort of redid my passion to find out, to stop this from happening again, and to really improve practice. So my PhD, I was fortunate enough to get a full-time studentship, looked at hips, and I think it was part of that passion, and for no one else to go through that process again. So for me, research is always about solving a problem, because you want to improve practice. It's not about doing it for the sake of doing it. It's not doing it to raise your own status quo. It's not doing it, I hope it's not doing it to improve your own careers, but it's doing it for the patients at the end of the day. It's doing it all for your profession. It's doing it because you want to make a difference. And I think that's how my career started. I've been very fortunate to meet some wonderful researchers on my way. So it's quite it's quite a personal story, but that's what's really motivated me and continues to motivate me. So I hate bad practice. I really, really detest it. So if I see it, I want to find out why, and I want to solve that bad practice. And what I've realised over the time is that I can't solve the world, but I can make a little difference as I'm going through. And that's why I think I've been such a prophetic writer amongst my way. So that's my story into research.
Gosh, Anita, I'm like sitting here feeling inspired already. Like you might be the one that turns me into the budding academic. Who knows? Janet, I feel like you've got such an act to follow there.
Well, for me, I was always curious as a young person, you know, always asking why. And I think my parents learned that I kind of interrogated pretty much everything I did. And so my journey actually started, I actually represent, I suppose, the pre-reg physiotherapy community, in that I did a degree before I started physio. So I actually started dealing with cells and organs in biological and chemical sciences. And my problem with that was these cells and organs didn't talk, they didn't walk. I couldn't do an intervention and figure out how it made any difference to their quality of life. So I soon figured out that I needed some sort of a change. So I became involved. I won a scholarship to attend King's, and that was really where my journey started. And I guess my first job was in a private hospital. And I remember at that time, they were still doing traction for low back pain, which is horrific. And I remember asking, why are you doing, or why do we do this? Or what is the reason behind this? We do this because this is the way we've always done it here, was what I was met with. So I knew that didn't feel right for me, and I knew I needed to move on. And so I moved to Guy's and St. Thomas's Hospital, which at the time was amazing. I was with people like me, people who asked why, people who questioned the status quo. And so I met so many amazing people that I could bounce ideas off. I became inspired by what they said, the way they learned new information. And then further on, I decided I needed to develop my research skills a little bit. So while I was doing little audits and bits and pieces within the hospital, I really felt like I needed some education to bolster me. And so I did an MSc at UCL, which was an advanced musculoskeletal practice. And it was there again doing a research module that really got me going, because what happened was they didn't just hand me the project. They said, you know, develop your own research idea, develop your own collaboration. And so there was ownership there in my own project. And that was an amazing start for me, because it made me realize that I could do this, that I could develop collaborations, that I could come up with an idea. And so that really got things going. And I suppose after that, I floundered a little bit, because I thought, well, I need to go, how do I continue this? You know, if I go back to clinical practice, will it be the same? And so I found myself going then where the research was. And if I had any advice to give people out there, it is go where the research is. You know, I took on a research physiotherapist role at Imperial College London, and I just got stuck in. And really, to be involved in research is to be tenacious. You have to go out there, put yourself out there, and go for what you're interested in. And eventually, with time, I developed a rapport and relationships with people outside of my own scope of practice, which meant together we were stronger and we could do amazing stuff to benefit patients. So I applied for a burst arthritis grant, which I was pregnant at the time. It was a bit of a leap, and obviously the challenge of being a mother and doing a PhD, it was a lot. But it all came right in the end, and now I'm continuing on my journey. I've just got a job with the University of Manchester, and I'll be the first AHP on the IAP program there. So all of us here on the panel, we're all breaking boundaries, we're doing new things, but every single one of us here, I can guarantee, are tenacious people. So, you know, that would be my advice, is get up, get out there, get curious, and get involved in research.
Thank you so much, Janet. Jen, coming to you.
So I would say very much like Janet, my passion for research started at a really young age. I was a great lover of the natural world, and I ended up doing a BSc in biological sciences and worked for a number of years as a lab technician. Eventually I got a research assistant post at Environmental Research Institute in Devon, and really my research career started there, even though I'm now at AHP. I worked on several projects there, quite big grants across lots of different disciplines, and got some publications and authorship for that. And I would say that the authorship issue is not just an issue with AHPs, it's a much broader issue across different disciplines, having experienced it in another subject. From there, my line manager at the time offered me the opportunity to do an employee-sponsored PhD, which I accepted with a little bit of trepidation, because I just found out I was pregnant with my second child. And my line manager was great. He said, "Don't worry about that, we'll work around it, it's fine." So started to do the PhD. Unfortunately, the due to restructuring of the research institute I was working at, our department was targeted to be removed completely. And it became very clear very quickly that it was not going to be possible to continue to do my PhD in a role that I'd moved to, because my PhD, in order to be able to do it as a mother, a new mother on a part-time basis, it was very much part of my job. So my job was my PhD, and it was worked around that. So I had quite a lot of discussions with them about that, and actually decided at that point to take a career change and to retrain as a podiatrist. But obviously I was still sort of in the middle of doing this PhD. At the time I hadn't gone through the transfer process. So what we decided to do was that I'd already collected most of my data, so I would stay on the MPhil, so the Masters of Philosophy route, and write up the data I had. So I spent the next 2 years writing that up, whilst also doing the first 2 years of my podiatry degree. So I qualified for that, and so I qualified as a podiatrist in 2014. Still very much interested in research, really wanting to do it, and I, very luckily for me, I managed to get a job at Torbay as a podiatrist, and the head of service and some of the other podiatrists that work there, Richard Collins and Sam Glasser, are very much involved with research. And I think they twigged quite quickly that I was into research, and said, "Well, can't we test that? And well, how do we know this works?" And started to put opportunities my way, really. The first one was I was lucky enough to apply for funding to complete one of the modules on the Master of Clinical Research at Plymouth University. Did that, really enjoyed it, gave me a real background into ethics and things like that. And then it was very much, well, where do I go from here? So in 2019, I applied for the Ergo Foundation Research Grant, which is it's a privately sponsored research opportunity for up to £20,000. And I was lucky enough to share the award with somebody else. So we got £10,000 out of that. And we used it to, firstly, I was able to do some more modules on the MCLIN res. And then I was also able to start my own research into a small investigation into patient engagement with treatment planning. In the diabetic foot, patients tend to disengage a little bit with their treatment, and it's about how to get them re-engaged with it, because it's quite a burden. If you've got really high risk diabetic feet with ulcers, the burden's quite high, and they after time they disengage. So from there, that also developed then into applying for the NIHR Pcaf, the Pre-Doctoral Clinical Academic Fellowship. It's not such a long process as applying for the doctorate. It probably takes about 3 months, I would say, to get it all in. And I was lucky enough last August to find out that I'd been accepted on that, and I started that role in January this year. So I split my time between the NHS in my clinical role and then doing my academic work, and that's very much about because I've already got research qualifications, it's very much about bridging the gap between the two and filling in spaces and gaps I don't have, and then also developing my clinical academic knowledge, because if you're doing an experiment on grass, it's very different to doing an experiment on people. So it's about making that change between the two disciplines, and really building my portfolio to be able to apply to do a PhD. So that will be the end of my Pcaf journey, will be to put in a PhD application to continue my research further.
Thank you so much, Jen. I mean, goodness, the mind just boggles there about that journey. Honestly, there's so many things I could say, but Rafiah, going to move on to you now, please.
Thanks, Rachel. I keep smiling all the way through because just I think of things and other people mention it, and it just shows there's so many parallels. And like the two key words that came into my mind as people were speaking was tenacity and innovation. And I think those are really the driving force for clinical researchers, especially AHPs, and making your own path. I come from a single parent family, so my upbringing was, very much the university path wasn't the normal path. So I was the first in my family to go to university, the first in probably my whole community to be a speech and language therapist. Being a pharmacist or a doctor was the standard path. It's like, what is this thing that you're going off to do? I studied at the University of Manchester, so that's quite nice hearing about Janet's journey. And I'd say, so I qualified, I began studying 19 years ago, so quite a while ago, and at the time there wasn't really this push towards clinical research. You qualified and go off and do your therapy now, and we had a bursary, and expectation was very much now bring it back to the NHS and go and be a therapist. And I did that. I kind of did pure clinical work for around 5 years, and it was quite good actually. It gave me a good foundation, so I felt like I really developed my clinical skills, got it right, got it wrong, started questioning, started thinking about perhaps more efficient ways of working, and kind of worked in different settings. So I worked in hospitals and schools, worked with complex needs, worked with children that had solely language difficulties, so kind of developed a range of skills, and then after 5 years I went into a managerial role, and I think there's this sense of responsibility then about the quality of your service and this accountability, and are we providing the best that we can, and really this conversation about evidence-based practice, are we combining our knowledge and experience with the research that's out there and looking critically at that research, and how do we translate it? So it's all of that kind of suddenly managing a team and thinking about not just what you're doing but what your team's doing, and the implications of that, and so I just started dipping my toes into research. And in terms of, at first I just started attending seminars, so it's at City University, so I worked in Northeast London, and City Uni was the kind of affiliated university, and literally just went to evening sessions. 90% of what I did in my first few kind of years into research was in my own time, kind of, just doing it for the love of it and the fear of it and finding out, which I think is very common, and started kind of listening to people in research, and then volunteering my time to be part of research projects, and just starting to become familiar in that world. And then a part-time opportunity came up to do a master's. Again, this was pre-NIHR, so it was an MSc at City, and they funded half of it. So I funded the rest and used my annual leave. So it's definitely a case of just piecing it all together. And I guess then you get a real feel of clinical research, because you're literally putting the two together at the same time. Then I did the master's, and then after that I moved from East London to South West London, started a family, went to maternity leave, and it just kind of went to the side for a bit. Then went back to work and started getting that itch again once I'd kind of gone through the whole returning to work after mat leave and kind of starting back in practice. Then really wanted to do research again. But I'd say at that stage my confidence was quite knocked in terms of just going back into clinical working. So it did feel like, oh. And I started by I ran some journal clubs. Literally, that was my kind of foray back into the research, which is such a tiny thing to do. But again, it kind of got my confidence and my interest again, and that asking why, and oh, this research study isn't that great, but people are really using those findings, and why are they doing, you know, all those kind of questioning, kind of just wanting to kind of dig a bit deeper. Our Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists set up like a research champions network, so I joined that. I carried out some audits within our trust, lots of little things, and then just started looking, realised that if I really wanted to do this, I need funding. It's just not sustainable, you know, to really make an impact and to kind of do research properly where you can follow it through. You do need funding, you need that time set aside to be valued and to do it properly. So then started looking at funding opportunities, and realised that it's a lot harder if you're not in medicine. And the trust I work for, St George's Trust, and I think they are going through a journey and they are changing, but it is a very, very medical bias trust, and I think they're very aware of it as well. And so if you're not in medicine, you're not even informed of opportunities. The local newsletters don't even cover it. It just goes straight to the medical teams. But I kind of pushed, and an opportunity came up where I had to be supervised with someone from the medical team, and it was a Wellcome Trust bursary, and it wasn't for me at all. It was a medical funding stream to be supervised with someone from the medical team for a kind of a medical project, and I kind of just sent off my application and really put in there why I felt that my project should be funded. And my project was looking at technology and innovation, and also really thinking about how to improve life chances and to increase opportunities for children. And I kind of argue that that's just as important as fixing them or providing a medical intervention. And I guess going back to that tenacity and just throwing yourself out of your comfort zone, I think sometimes that's quite well received. I still don't know why my supervisor agreed to supervise me, but he did, and he was fantastic. And I think you just need one or two people to kind of believe in you, and then you start kind of believing yourself, and then you can kind of start pushing a bit more. So that was one day a week for 6 months, got the back pay to do some research, and literally just went into the schools and kind of gave an iPad to the children. We tried doing therapy together. Felt like such an imposter, you know, just the whole trying to do ethics, trying to kind of speak to parents and kind of get their consent and the whole process. And there was no access to training. There was no time for any of that. There was no funding for any of that. So I just had to do it, almost show that I could do it, to then be able to apply for the funding to do it properly, if that makes sense. So did that, and then during that time, my supervisor encouraged me to apply for the NIHR, so the PhD stream, so the Clinical Doctoral Research Fellowship. And Jen's right, it takes a long time to put together an application. It took me over a year, and I think the NIHR is fantastic. The fellowship I'm on, I can't recommend it enough, just because of the opportunity it gives and the chance to really be creative and to do research and to explore things. But to get to that stage, you almost have to show you can do it before you can do it. So you have to compile a team of supervisors, you have to show work that you've already done, you have to do so much of the stuff that I'm, you know, not having done a PhD, so I'd be interested to see what you think, Jen, but almost do bits of a PhD before you've even started the PhD. So it's a heck of a journey. And again, it's interesting hearing other people talk. I was pregnant during that time, so it must be something about big life changes rather than shying away, which people with any common sense would do, kind of throw yourself in even more. So kind of juggling that. So yeah, so put a year into that application and then submitted that, and was successful. So that's what I'm doing now. So I'm doing my NIHR CDRF, and I started it last June, and I'm balancing some clinical work and some research work. The two have merged together so nicely because I'm looking at children's experiences of digital and their role in developing digital therapy. And it's so timely right now. And I feel actually really privileged because I was really able to bring that back to our trust. And when there was this whole shift towards remote working, I was just slightly ahead of the game, just slightly ahead, but enough to kind of take that leadership with that area and really push it through. And I think research allows you to do that. It kind of allows you to say, well, I don't know all the answers, but I'm hopefully got the skills to try things in a structured way and to kind of feed back. So at the moment, it's just fantastic. I'm putting the clinical research world together. It's got its challenges and it's busy, very busy, but yeah, I love it.
Thanks, Rafiah. Now I'm coming to Angie next, but I just want the panel to start thinking of a couple of things that I'm picking up. And the question I'm going to ask after Angie is about, do we think there's stereotypes that exist for people that go into research within the AHPs? And another question is, like, if you're going down a research pathway, do you have to have an interest in that research? So I'll elaborate more on that, but Angie, can I come to you for your journey now, please?
Yeah, so my research journey started, I was a band 6, and I was probably about 6 months into that band 6 role, and I think it's really important for people to know that maybe leads to your next question, in terms of there's an expectation that probably you're a band 7 before you should be asking to do the things that I wanted to do. So I was very much like Anita. I wanted to make a difference, to have as much knowledge and skill as I could have to be the best clinician that I could be for the people that I was working with. So I decided to do a couple of MSc modules, and then before I knew it, I'd signed on the dotted line, and there I was going to do the whole MSc. And so I did that part-time whilst I was working full-time, which really allowed me to take the learning and the theory back to my clinical practice, ask the questions, look at changing practice, taking that back into looking at research projects and stuff. And when I was in the final year of doing my MSc, I was approached to see if I wanted to look to apply for funding to do a PhD. Now, I was feeling pretty broken at the end of that. I was working full time, like other people have mentioned. I was using my annual leave for the first 2 years because there wasn't that culture where I was working, and it was only that I'd moved into another job that a couple of other clinicians were also doing a master's. So I kind of played the equity card and said, look, we all need to have the same opportunities here. So I didn't actually really, with much excitement, want to leap into doing something different, but the person that spoke to me clearly had really good sales chat, because I said, oh, okay, then let's talk about it. So in those days, the Pcaf that Jennifer's doing didn't exist. It was the clinical academic training internship. And so I applied for that, but that really stemmed from my clinical practice. So very much like Anita, the people that I was working with and the things that I was seeing, I was questioning, well, why is that? Why is that happening to my patients? Why isn't that happening? Why are my colleagues doing this and not that? And so then doing that internship allowed me to have 1 day a week out of my clinical practice to do lots and lots of patient and public involvement, which is really key to make sure that we're doing research that is relevant and meaningful for the people that we're doing the research with. And so then that allowed me to spend a year putting together an application for the NIHR Clinical Doctoral Research Fellowship. And as Rafiah says, it's kind of like a mini project. It's almost like a test. if you can do all of that and get everyone to sign it off electronically on time, you know, you're showing that you have got the resilience and the motivation to really kind of get you through the PhD. And so then I did my PhD, and I did that initially the first probably 18 months full-time, because I vowed that I was never going to do it part-time again, because it nearly broke me and it was just so exhausting. And then a job opportunity came up. It was too good to pass, so I then dropped down to part-time and finished the last 14 months of my PhD while I was working 3 10-hour days, which probably wasn't really supposed to be doing, but that was my choice. I wanted that opportunity. Those opportunities were kind of rare, and I think what was really interesting is that the fellowship and the funding, I was the first person within my NHS trust and the first person in the county to go knocking on my manager's door and say, oh, hey, I'd really like to do this. And actually, when there's not necessarily an established and embedded research culture, it's quite daunting. And so, you know, if the one takeaway message from this is, you know, don't be put off by that. Don't be afraid by knocking on someone's door and asking, because actually if you pitch it, you know, a bit like your elevator pitch, you know, you go in there and you say the patient story and you give the benefits. This would be really amazing for the patients. This is what it would mean to your service and your teams. But actually, I was really lucky with, you know, with a few good conversations was supported in that. And then actually what's great is that other people then have come through and that channel has been just kind of slightly easier. And so I think it's really great that when Rafiah says about that tenacity and the innovation, it is about breaking down those barriers and asking questions and preparing yourself for people to say no, or I'm not sure about that, and just to keep pushing and really believing that it's really important. So yeah, I don't regret it for a minute.
Thank you so much. Now, Anita, I'm going to come to you because you've been listening. You went first and you've been listening to all these stories and paths that people have followed. So it sounds to me there's a certain stereotype of person that gets themselves involved in research. And I mean, do you think that for the people that are out there listening thinking, I want to get into research, I don't know how, is there a stereotype or do you just need attributes? That's the first part that I'd like you to answer. And then the second part, I'm just going to elaborate on something that you said that really touched me. So stereotypes.
Stereotypes. I think it starts at undergraduate level when AHPs are forced to do research modules and they're forced to look at research and they go, never again, I don't want to do this. My personal view is that perhaps we should just ditch it at undergraduate level and think about doing something else. So the stereotype then begins because AHPs then say, I am never going to do research again. I never want to see a research paper and I want to go into practice, but I'm so used to my salary now. I'm not going to take a pay cut. I'm not going to do anything else. I want to be a clinician. So there's this idea, I think, a real culture about, so the stereotype is that you've got two kinds of stereotypes. You've got people like me that are prepared to ask, go in there and want to solve a problem because of a personal nature. And then I suppose you've got those very academic types that come into physio or to OT or to speech and language or to be a podiatrist that think, I don't really like patients perhaps and I want to go across this track. And then you've got people that help you along the way, or maybe you fall into it by accident, or you make friends with the medics. So nurses are great allies within all of this. You know, nurses get money thrown at them to do research. If you make friends with nurses, they really do help you along the way. So a really interprofessional feel to it. And I think I was almost going to say it's about being a prostitute, really. It's like whoever is going to help you get into bed with the right people, basically. I mean, that's the way I see it. That's the way I see us developing research, really, is who can help you. So, yes, I think there is a stereotype kind of person that goes into research. the second part of that question is, what do you do once once you want to develop your research career? And my time, it was only into academia, but now you can be a band 8, you can be a band B, you can go and work for NHS England, you can become a leadership. There's so many different avenues with research skills that will enable you to do amazing things. And for me, as I said before, it's about change. It's about changing lives. But most importantly, research has to be relevant to patients. It has to come from patients. It has to have that engagement. You cannot do it. You cannot just do it for the sake of doing it. You've got to do it because it's going to change. It's going to have an impact on people's lives. So that for me is the most important starting point. So yeah, and I think AHPs are good at research because our whole process of our training is about critical thinking, and that's what we're about. So I think we make fantastic researchers, really. We just don't know it. It's just that we perhaps damper the spirits of undergraduates very early on, and say, and then they go, no, don't talk to me about it. But yeah.
So I think that just brings me on to my second point for now. And you had this very personal journey in terms of you had a specific, a terrible experience with your mum dying, and something that maybe you could influence, or that could be influenced, and could change practice and change the lives of other people. For those people that are out there thinking, I want to get involved in research and I know this is the right thing for me, but I don't have that research interest, is it important to have that something you want to change? And I'm thinking about some of the roles that I see advertised, like this PhD funding to do this particular PhD in this. And, people just think, oh, I'm going to apply for that. Do you have to, because you're going to live, breathe this, is this something you have to have an interest in? Who wants to start by answering that? Janet?
Well, I'm very happy to answer this question, because I think remembering your why is actually what gets you through the PhD, because there are very long days, very long nights, highs and extreme lows, and it is the why. So my why was improving treatment for people with arthritis, and that helps to push me through the very difficult times. So I think personally that's extremely important. I think for a time it can be useful. So there are transferable skills. So for example, you may see a research project advertised that you could be a research physiotherapist on. And during that time, you could see methodologies that perhaps you could learn from, how to do a systematic review, how to, but at the end of the day, if the topic isn't of interest to you, that will only serve you for a very short time. I think to undertake, from my personal experience and that of others that I've seen along the journey, the why is really important, and it is what gets you through.
Thank you. Anita, I'm just presuming you agree with this, but do you have any comments on this? And is there anyone that thinks differently maybe?
I totally agree with that. The people that perhaps that don't finish PhDs is because they're not passionate about it sometimes, and there's lots of life events that interrupt. But I totally agree with that. I think you can take advantage of opportunities that come along, but if you want to be run your own research projects, then you've got to be passionate about a certain area. That's my belief anyway, because you need to develop teams behind you. And I think our role, particularly as I get older, is to enable the next generation. That's how I see myself now. Is making sure that we've got the legacy behind us. So yes, I never thought I'd start saying that, but I'm starting to see myself as a matriarch.
I love that. So I suppose before I move on to my next kind of question, is there, again, for those people who maybe don't have that specific research idea or who haven't had that life-changing event or idea, how can they get into research? So they know they want to do research, they know all the benefits. I listen to you guys thinking, yes, but I just don't have the idea. What avenues exist? Rafiah, coming to you. And then Jen, Angie, if you want to jump in, please do.
Yeah, I've just been reflecting quite a bit in terms of when I did my MSc, it wasn't necessarily because I had this burning research question. It was more because of my role at the time of being in a more of a senior role, very aware that I had a BSc, most of the people in my team had an MSc, and what that meant in terms of critical appraisal skills, I guess, and also, I guess, just how long it'd been since I'd kind of been in that research, you know, being at university and being in that whole field. And so my MSc wasn't a research MSc as such, it was a human communication. So it was almost kind of a specialist level of knowledge across the board. And I dipped into things like adult dysphagia, and I work, so that's swallowing problems in adults, and I specialise in children with language needs. So it was almost, for me, an opportunity to kind of refresh my knowledge, get a higher level of kind of critical appraisal skills and theoretical skills, broaden my knowledge. And then as that journey progressed, I began to realise that actually I want to take this further. So it was almost the other way of, didn't have a burning research question at the time, but came out of it thinking I really, really want to kind of, I guess what I can say is that my focus has always been thinking of the user journey. So whether that be the child themselves or the carers or the professionals supporting, what is the user journey and how can it be improved? And I guess a lot of frustration when it's not as efficient or as high quality or as nice a journey as it should be, if that makes sense, you know. And so that's always been my driving force. But coming out of my MC, I wanted to do something that would very, very tangible and specific, that would improve that. And I guess that led me into digital, because I just felt that it had so much potential, and also it was being used in schools already, so I kind of felt like there's already indication that there's potential there, but as clinicians we're not using. So I went into it with a real desire to improve outcomes, but not with a burning research question. And actually dipping your toes in is good, because research is very, very, very demanding, and I think it's okay to say that it's not for everyone. I took a break from it, I did my MSc and then took a break and then came back into it. So it might be by trying, say, 1 or 2 modules, or trying little projects within your trust, or, you know, just signing up to be part of a bigger project is okay, just to see how you feel about it, and to kind of, rather than jumping straight into a PhD and thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done? So again, it's very roundabout, and different people have different experiences, but that's my kind of journey into it. And then once I had my research question, I would have let go. That's when I was knocking on people's doors, and even if they were trying to turn me away, I, you know, just kept going.
Thanks, Rafiah. Angie.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of not everyone wants to do an MSc module or a PhD, and I think that's where it's maybe finding out the networks within your trust. So within in Cornwall, in the southwest, we've got the clinical schools that are affiliated with the university and in clinical trusts. So they have various different clinics and events that you can get involved in. There's quite a lot of ad hoc clinics and events that the NIHR run that you can go and chat to someone. There's the research design service that they have got lots of experts who are really, really friendly, because ultimately they want, you know, it's kind of like a family. They want you to come in and do research, and they want to support you, and they'll signpost you to where they feel, you know, there's an expertise in your kind of chosen topic or your methodology. And then also the CAPRA and the NIHR champions. So Rich and I in the southwest, and there's also the CAPRA champions that sit within different clinical trusts. I think half the battle is finding who can open those doors for you, because, you know, we can do lots of events and networking, but we don't necessarily get in touch with everyone on the ground. We're reliant on the managers cascading that information out, and we're advertised on Twitter. Everyone's on Twitter, so it's just trying to find someone who can help you. And it might be that your local R&D, research and development department, are a really good place to start, because they will often be looking for therapists to collect data or assess patients as part of a clinical trial, or they might know that someone's doing a systematic review. So one of the opportunities that I took within my research was when I was working at different sites. Actually, a couple of clinicians, I offered the opportunity, would they like to be involved in a systematic review? So they did some work, and that sort of links back a little bit what we'll maybe talk about a bit later with authorship. But it's about trying to pay forward those opportunities that you had. But I think half of it is trying to find out where to go. And so I think CAPRA is probably one of the first places I would recommend knocking on the door, having a look on their website and chatting to people, because they have networks and meetings, and it's trying to find out what's going on, because it doesn't have to be formal study. There's lots of different ways that you can be involved.
Thank you.
I was just thinking if I could just add, just so everybody knows what CAPR is. So it's the Council for Allied Health Professions and Research. And there is a website that's associated with them. So it's cahpr.csp.org.uk. And they have an official Twitter site at official CAHPR. So if you're interested in research, essentially they're interested in representing all AHPs, building research capacity and capability throughout the UK. There's hubs in every location. I'm part of the committee in London, but I'm now transitioning to help open a new hub in Manchester. And it's just a really good resource. So if you go to their website, you can access information on grants, mentorship. There's local educational days where sort of how-to days, how to write a paper, how to speak at a conference, this sort of thing. And just by directly contacting them and reaching out and kind of just to reflect on everything that has been said by all of these amazing women, is that just stepping up a little bit and reaching out to connect with them will really help you. But there's also, I've just started a healthcare professions and research Facebook community for doctoral and postdoctoral researchers. There's currently 200 members, and we all just link in and share what we've learned, any questions we have with each other. It's designed to be a community that really just supports, shares and inspires each other. There's no room for bullying or anything like that. It's a very professional site. But again, that came about because I found myself, and many will, as you transition from one community to another. So for example, in my personal experience, so I was very interested in muscle and movement, but in order to analyze it, I needed to go where the technology was. So at Imperial College London, I found myself surrounded by engineers, computer programmers, a bit like Rafiah, technology, but in a different way. And essentially I was moving from my NHS community into a community that I was totally unfamiliar with. People who didn't speak the same language I did, who didn't understand patients in the same way as I did. So I think for me, having that little community on Facebook or CAPR really helped me to have a week with the scientists, and then at the end of the week kind of meet up with my own and kind of discuss what my experiences were and ask for help as I needed it. So there is help out there, you just have to reach out for it.
Thank you. Now, Jen, I want to come to you because every single person has talked about personal sacrifice of some description. And my first question is, probably links into like how motivated or how enthused you need to be about the research question, or what your desired outcome's going to be for getting involved in research. But is that right? Like, should AHPs getting into research have to be prepared to make a significant personal sacrifice in order to go down a research career? I'm really old school, and I'm going to put it out there and probably get criticised for it, but some of the newly qualified AHPs that are coming out, maybe they're like very 9 to 5, there's no kind of project work in their own time. I'm having to learn that that's the new way that people are coming out of university, and be mindful that a work-life balance is really good to have. But where maybe a bit older in my careers, maybe that is old school now. And I'm aware that our medics do make personal sacrifices, to go on to develop in the world of medicine and to achieve that consultant post and to go down with research. It's not easy. So do we need to be prepared for some element of personal sacrifice? Is it too much at the minute? Like I think Angie was alluding to, do we need to really build on the pathways for AHP, need to be ingrained? What are your thoughts on that?
So in an ideal world, obviously everything would be funded, and we'd get clinical time and academic research time, and it would all, be, you could do both together, and it would all be seamless, and you wouldn't spend evenings doing work or weekends emailing people about stuff. I think probably the biggest problem is if you are trying to balance a clinical job with a research job, it's defining the barrier between the two, because I want to do the best for my patients. I'm only in clinic 2 days a week. I will still be answering emails and chasing up my patients and making sure they're all right on my research days, which then means that I then have to do my research later, maybe in my own time, to make up the time that I've spent doing that, because that is the way I work. So I'm probably a bit old school as well. I'm quite happy to put time in at the end of the day or at the weekend to make sure my patients are all safe and happy and progressing, but also to put the time and effort into my research. Some aspects of it don't always come easy to people, and I might need to spend more time looking at stats than I've put on my Gantt chart, because I don't quite understand what's going on. And I feel that that's just the way it is. And if you want to do well I think in any career, actually, it doesn't necessarily need to be as an AHP in research, you need to put in that extra time, probably outside of work anyway. Obviously in an ideal world we wouldn't have to do that, but I enjoy what I do. I really love it, and I'll be thinking about something later, and I'll go and jot it down. So it's also about that. The downtime gives you time to reflect on what you've done and build on it a little bit more. I think the pathways for AHPs getting into research are improving. But we've got people here who are preparing to do PhDs, who have done PhDs, who are in the middle of doing PhDs. So the opportunities are out there. It's about making them more accessible and in some ways easier to do. The Pcaf has helped with that, because part of my Pcaf, one of the aims is to write that PhD application. So I'm not having necessarily to write that as other people will have in their own time. I have allocated time to do that. But with the Pcaf, they expect quite a lot from you. So you need to build up your portfolio. So I'm also doing a systematic review and a small piece of research that I have to go through ethics for. And it's a 2-year process. So it's quite a lot to fit into a 2-year period of time, whilst also doing some master's modules. I wouldn't change the experience for the world, but I probably do put more time in than I'm paid for, without question.
Thank you. Now, Anita, I'm going to come to you as this self-professed, confessed research motivator. Do you have to be proper clever to really go down this research pathway? And by clever, I mean someone who has got really great grades previously who has got their 2-1s or first at their undergraduate degree, like, do you have to know like how to say long words and stuff like that? Like, do you know, tell us straight here for the people out there that are listening to this.
Absolutely not. I think what helps is the ability to write, because you have to be able to write, or learn to write. And I think that's what people struggle with. It's not actually the concepts, it's the writing. So I think learning to write and the academic language is probably the thing that people struggle with the most. And it is a journey. And it's a bit like when we get into authorship, you know, writing certain parts of a paper improves your confidence. You learn how to do it. So I think, no, you don't have to be proper clever. You have to just have, and let's face it, as AHPs, we talk to patients every day. Is that not qualitative research? Is that not? So we are fantastic interviewers. We are fantastic at certain types of research. What we do have to learn perhaps sometimes is a bit better is the quantitative side, but that's not difficult to learn. That's not maths, that's statistics. You can learn that, you can look them up. It's not difficult to do. And we've got statisticians to help us. And that's why I think AHPs are such fantastic researchers, particularly qualitative researchers, because we love people. And that's the whole point of qualitative research. So we do it daily. And yet we don't want to research it. We don't actually want to utilise it as a research method. But I think if you like people, you're going to like research. So that's my selling point anyway.
What a selling point that is. So I'm really conscious of time. We've been talking for an hour, just over an hour now. So I want to cover authorship, and then I want everyone to think about an inspirational final point. So if to kind of quote the scenario that led us here, it was about a research study that had been going on where predominantly physiotherapists, but not only physiotherapists, had been delivering the intervention and collecting the audit data. In my eyes, that would be enough of a contribution to be asked if they wanted authorship on the paper. Is that right? Is that wrong? Am I totally off the mark here? Who wants to kick that off? Janet?
So essentially there are certain rules around this. So if we go through all the hard knuckled evidence here. So essentially there's this, most journals that you submit to are bound by ICJME kind of rules, which are the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. And what they say is that there's 4 criteria that have to be fulfilled in order to be accepted for authorship. The first criteria is perhaps the most important. So this is, have you made a substantial contribution to the conception or the design of the work, or the analysis or interpretation of data for the work? So that's the first criteria. Now, what's important about this first criteria is, having met that under these guidelines, it means that you should have the opportunity to participate in the review, drafting, and final approval of any manuscript if you have fulfilled that criterion. So essentially, I would see from that perspective, it is up to us as well to, as I was saying earlier, take our place at the table. So knowing this information, I think it's really important. If you're out there and you are beginning to get involved in authorship, it's really important, like we discussed the expectations with our patients. We align everything very neatly up. But when it comes to research, everything isn't as clear. It's a bit more muddy. And I think this is where we have to step up and kind of make clear, what is my role in this? What is your role in this? What are the expectations that will arise from this? So I would say, if anybody's out there looking in terms of authorship, to go to icmje.org to check the criteria for authorship. And if you're in a confused state and you're not too sure and you want advice, go to the CAPR website and contact CAPR. there's always help available. There's also Elsevier journals have this credit system, and this is short for the contributor roles taxonomy. And this is essentially where you report exactly who had responsibility for what information. So again, you should be featuring in that credit role if you have made a substantial contribution.
Thank you. I think that's just such explained it in such an understandable manner, even for me. Does anyone want to add anything into that? And maybe just even how important it is that AHPs make sure their contribution is valued and appreciated. And is it important that you build up your research portfolio, if you like, by contributing to papers in that manner? Rafiah?
So I think I'm fairly unique in that I hadn't published when I was awarded my NIHR CDRF, and I was encouraged over and over again, or told that if you've not published, wait another year, wait till you publish and then apply. And it wasn't for lack of wanting to be published. It's really interesting what Anita has said. I did a qualitative project, wrote it all up, submitted it, got very good feedback. The reason it was accepted is because the sample size was too small. And now, having done a lot more qualitative kind of training and networking with a lot of qualitative researchers, I would have had the confidence to go back to them and say, no, that's not a reasonable reason to reject. This is a very good piece of work. And I say a very good piece of work is because I read papers and I structured it appropriately, and the content wasn't the thing that was criticized. It was sample size, which wasn't an appropriate criticism. So I wasn't published. So, and I guess for me, it is that I think the thing was I was awarded the PhD because I showed, this is based on the feedback I was given, that I was worth investing in, because I showed that I was able to kind of achieve things. So in terms of being able to run a small scale study, being able to get ethical approval, being able to get supervisors on board, and I think the NIH process, one real strength of it is this clinical supervision, because I think having a clinical supervisor keeps you grounded. So just as Janet said, you start to feel lost because the whole point of innovative research is you go out of your comfort zone and you go there and you do new things, but then without that grounding, you do lose sight of and you start questioning things. And so the clinical research supervision really helps. And now I'm writing 3 papers, and I'm hoping that they will all, I've put a lot of effort, and I've partnered. I think the other thing is to partner and to not be worried about that, to kind of have that confidence, to show what your skill set is, to show what you can bring by co-authoring, and to talk about that from very early on. We bring a really unique skill set. I think Anita's absolutely right. And I think whether it be qualitative or quantitative, it does lend itself better to qualitative. And we work with patients day in, day out, and we really form really strong relationships with them. And we have quite a unique insight. So actually, if we are part of a research project, we bring really strong skills. And I say, go into it right from the beginning and negotiate what your role is going to be, and what are you going to get out of it? What is it tangible? How are you going to show this? And have the confidence to do that. And I think people will be surprised by the yeses they get, because it should be a win-win situation, and people are coming for us to have you on board because there's a skill set that they want. Then it's only right that that's acknowledged when you publish. But yeah, so starting from this from my journey anyway, I hadn't published, and it wasn't an hindrance for me to get the award that I wanted. And now in a position that I'm quite well on the way to publishing. Still a novice, relatively speaking, but feeling more comfortable in that area. So don't worry if you haven't published. It's okay. But I guess that there are channels there, and having the confidence there and not underselling yourself is so important.
Thank you. Angie, I'm coming to you, then I'm coming to people for final thoughts and inspirational comments. Angie.
I think there's 2 perspectives to it. I think as AHPs, we need to be armed with the information so that we can ask the question, And also it needs to come from whoever's approaching us. So if you're like your colleagues where, you know, this whole conversation started, where they're collecting data or involved in other ways in the trial, that actually those people that are running the trial need to come and say, would you like to be involved? This is what work is involved. This is what you need to do to be able to get authorship. So I think it's a balance of the two. And it's about that openness and transparency from whoever's leading the trial, but also for us to spread the word with this podcast in terms of don't be afraid to ask and to say, what is my role? What are the opportunities for me to have authorship, so that you do try and create those opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, and I think Anita articulated it lovely at the beginning when it's like, know who your allies are in research. So I remember in one organisation I worked, I was furious, and Georges used to be terrible at this, Rafiah, in terms of research nurse posts only being for nurses. And I was like, why can't AHPs apply for these? Like, you know, and they said, oh, because I can't take blood. And I'm like, we can learn, it's just a skill, you know. That's something that I'm sure we can overcome. So I think it's about challenging the status quo, like you said, Anita. You know, what are the enablers? Are the enablers people who traditionally get the research grants or traditionally do the research? Find your friend and say, how can I get involved when the next research comes along of X nature? I want to be part of that. That might involve the personal sacrifice people have spoke about, or like Angie and Janet have spoke about. It might be fine going to your line manager and saying, look, research is heavily on the AHP agenda. There's a real national drive. It's part of the NHS plan, you know, and we have the great skills. So, you know, negotiating that within your job role as the 5, as the 6, as the 7, whoever you are, have an interest, because chances are people who genuinely have that interest and want to pursue it are probably going to be in the minority of clinical, you know, in them kind of really clinical, heavy clinical roles, 6 or 7s. But I think that's changing, Anita, like you said, and it's maybe not enforcing the agenda, but recognizing people's attributes that would make them great researchers, and then the huge vast of opportunities that are available that you've all described here. It's not just about having an MSc, and I have a massive bugbear with some HPs that go down the MSc and PhD route because it's a tick box to get your Band 8 roles, and I haven't got an MSc, I haven't got a PhD, I've been in consultant roles, I'm in a director role now. Like, you've got to have the interest and, like you said, in the desire and want to do that, because if not, it's a wasted opportunity, and you know, it's not going to be successful. And you guys are all successful because of the dedication, the drive, the accountability, the tenacity, the enthusiasm that you've all described. And I take my hat off to you, because it's certainly not something that's ever floated my boat to the point where I dedicate my life to some of the projects you guys have. So I want everyone to have the final word, and I'm going to come round in order just for any final thoughts, comments, or inspiration for people that are listening. Anita.
So my inspiration is to the BAME community. So I am looking, as you probably know, there is very little research around the BAME community. There's the representation is really low in leadership roles. So if you're a BAME researcher, research is for you. There is a career pathway for you. We've got mentorship, we've got pathways, we've got networks. Don't be afraid. Come and talk to us. But when we talked about being passionate, this is my new passion. My new passion now is the BAME community, for very personal reasons as well. So that's my plea to the BAME AHPs out there, is come and do research, please. It is for you. And I was really inspired, Rachel, by your view that you wouldn't sit on any committees or do talks unless there was a BAME member of staff with you. And I nearly cried when I said that, because that was so inspirational for me, and that's truly what leadership is about. So thank you for saying that. It really motivated me as well. So that was really cool. Thank you.
Well, thank you. But that was a BAME mentor of mine that held me to account with that, and I'm really glad they did, because it was first in action. So I had my first conference that came back and changed that panel. You know, I give it credit. So, and what a role model you are, Anita, for everyone out there, you know, from all backgrounds. So thank you so much. Janet.
Well, in terms of inspiration, what I would just say is, I suppose, be confident to reach out. So identify those people who maybe are around you that you feel like, oh, I identify with you, or, you know, at a conference. Don't be afraid to network. Don't be afraid to say, hi, this is my research interest, or, you know, don't be scared to reach out. Be courageous, and above all, I would say, just shine brightly. Be who you are, be authentic and with integrity. I think that comes across. So anybody who's even approached me now about research, or has asked me questions about, you know, can I do this as a mom? Can I do this? I was a first generation woman in my family to go to college, let alone do a PhD. So for me, I really enjoy when people come up and speak to me and ask me questions about what I'm doing or want to get involved. You know, it's a real privilege. So don't be scared and be courageous.
Thank you. Jen?
So I would say something quite similar, really, especially if you're an early stage researcher, that would be to build your network within your organisation. So build your support network around you. Look to other AHPs, nursing researchers who can support you. If you're lucky enough to be in a position I'm in, where there has been a trailblazer ahead of you, a lot of the issues will have occurred before, and you can learn a huge amount from what they've been through, and hopefully it will stop you having to go through the same issues, or you will know how to deal with it more quickly and save yourself a lot of stress. And it really is about building that network, because they're not only there to help with those things, even the application process for some of these things is not straightforward, and it's about having people there to support you, not only through the highs when you've been accepted or you've had a paper, but it's when things aren't going so well and you need that little bit of support just to keep yourself going. It could be any, but I know where I work, we have all the AHPs that are in research have a network, and we talk regularly, and it's a really useful thing to have.
Thank you, Jen. That's great advice. Rafiah, coming to you.
Thanks, Rachel. I guess two things. I think the first is, don't forget your why. If you keep that as your guiding kind of beacon, especially when you're kind of immersed in a writing and you sat in front of the laptop, which now is the norm, I guess, for so many people. But when you're just kind of getting so immersed in things that are so different to your clinical kind of day-to-day world, and just pausing and thinking back to why, or even going back into that clinical, spending a day back with the patients, reminding yourself why you're doing this in the first place. So you're having that why, or even just writing out, having there and seeing why, and keeping that as your kind of guide. And then the second was, my heart just grew when I heard Anita say about the kind of AHPs from BAME background. So Rachel and I have discussed this in another podcast. The stream that I'm on, an AHR CDRF, over 100 people applied. I applied, and there's 2 people from a BAME background. And when you look at those stats, I think, oh, I'm one of the 2. It's pretty heartbreaking. But I would love if people, from, of course, all AHPs, it's for all of us, it is it is a challenge, if you're not from the non-medical profession, but the numbers kind of speak for themselves. And I think that if we can even just plug, chip away at that and just change those. Rachel's been to give the platform. HEE weren't aware of it, and I had the opportunity to draw attention to that during a podcast, which I hope, and then they went back and reflected and gave me some feedback about things they're going to do to change. But I think if all of us can work together to kind of just show that the route is there, and to kind of just have that inclusivity, I think that would be great. Yeah,
Rafiah, 100%. And I think part of this is about forming the friendships. And, you know, in case I forget to say it, everyone on the panel is more than happy to be reached out to, and their Twitter handles will be below this on the YouTube channel and on Podbean. So please do reach out to them.
Sorry, Rachel, one more thing. Twitter, a year ago, I had like 10 followers on Twitter. I kid you not, I have like 1,200 now. And it was all because of my supervisor, Jackie McRae. And she said, get onto Twitter. And I was like, what is this Twitter? I don't get the big deal. It is phenomenal for research, because research is so fast paced and it's about networking. Don't worry if you're not sure how it works and what, just get on it, start following people, and you will be amazed by just what comes out of it.
Yeah, shout out to Jackie. Angie.
I'll definitely echo what Rafiah said there. So Twitter, if you use the hashtag AHPs in research, all one word, so that is the hashtag that as the CAPRA and NIHR research champions try to use. And so often when I'm retweeting and sharing stuff, I will use that hashtag. So then when you search for that, hashtag AHPs in research, then you'll be able to find, and that will really allow you to widen your network. And I think I would definitely describe it as a tribe or a collective, that you need to really get your tribe who are equally as passionate, who can support you and direct you, because I think there are those people, sadly, that maybe kind of like slightly mood hoovers about it, in terms of, oh, I don't want to do research, and if there's no research culture, that can be quite difficult to push against. So I would definitely encourage you to, you know, be on Twitter, and the AHP champions, we use the AHPs in research, but I think definitely don't be afraid to be a trailblazer and speak up. It's just all about, if you're really passionate about it, that will get you through. That's not to say you'll encounter knockbacks and barriers, but if you've got your tribe and you know who you can reach out to, you're more likely to be able to, you know, maintain that resilience and achieve what you want to achieve.
Fabulous, thank you. Well, I just want to say a massive thank you to the whole panel. You've been amazing. Please reach out if anyone wants to talk to anyone in an individual level, or we'll signpost you to the resources. Thanks so much.